Hello. So, in this video I will give you my thoughts on the current climate change movement that we're experiencing around the world. And I would say experiencing pretty intensely in my part of the world, which would be Sweden. So, I always like to play, the devil's advocate, as we say. Standing up for perhaps the opposite of an opinion. And why I like to do this is because well, if you don't, well, then you don't know what you really stand for, I think. And I've also always been fond of, debating and making up arguments, and also, picking apart reasoning. So just a little bit of context. So let's skip the climate bit of this movement for a little bit, and just focus on the movement itself. And as with any kind of movement that you want people to feel involved with and engage in, and perhaps also feel emotionally involved in, I think it's important to understand the so-called modus operandi that's used, because at this point it's a lot of economical aspects involved. There's a lot of people's money and time involved in the movement overall, and the changes that the movement want to introduce to society and the world at large. And with understanding any kind of movement, I think it's the best way to get a movement started and keep it going is to attach some kind of moral aspect to it. And the best thing for a movement to have is the ability to connect people's happiness and overall sense of fulfillment in life to the reality they perceive and the actions that they act out. And as with any kind of negotiation, be it business, be it relationships, bottom line, you want to possibly reduce the possibility to disagree with what's stated, and make it seem like there's perhaps there's alternatives, but the alternatives would be so bad that you don't want to get close to those. And in the end, negotiation is about if you want to win the argument or the negotiation, you would want the other part to not be able to disagree, and that's again the moral aspect. So let's get back to this kind of movement, the green movement, or the climate change, climate movement, or whatever you want to call it. So why is this happening? So what we know scientifically is that the Earth's temperature is rising on average. And what does this mean? So, temperature is not something that's stable for the Earth over time. But as of now, we have evidence that human activity is of course, is affecting the Earth's atmosphere, the Earth's, the life on Earth, and the temperature as well. And I don't think this is a problem in itself. But the current problem is that, at the height, the speed that the temperature is increasing would be, very fatal to the survival of mankind, they say. And perhaps also some people would think it's fatal for the survival of the planet. And I'm not going to get stuck on those arguments right now. Perhaps we'll get back to them later. I'm just going to try to focus on some points in this climate movement. So, as some of you may have noticed, it's very interesting today to know, the carbon dioxide and how things we do and produce, affect the overall content of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we seem to have gotten stuck on, this simple point or simple variable that's called carbon dioxide. And once again, if you want to start a movement, you want to get people connected, involved, and feel like they relate to it, have a place in it, you want to keep things simple. So you want to keep a message simple, and also you want to have it, measurable. If I can put a measure on, for example, how much carbon dioxide this pen would produce and add to the current atmosphere, it would be easy for you to, compare this pen with, say, something you do in your daily routine. Perhaps you're eating something, perhaps you're doing some kind of travel, perhaps you're consuming some kind of product. You want to, be able to weight these against each other. So the message is very simple today, and it's simple because, people are not that good at critical thinking, or perhaps we are very good at critical thinking, but perhaps we would like to spend our time doing, other things that we have planned for ourselves, things that we have in mind, things that we imagine ourselves in our lives. And that's not so strange, I think. At work we prefer perhaps if we can make the decisions ourselves, we can plan for our day and not be told what to do and how to do it. And it's pretty simple. So a simple message and a simple measurement that we can relate to. I'm just going to start off with some questions. So the first question was, why is the CO2 so interesting? Perhaps you have an answer. And the second question would be, how have you noticed, the change in climate in your daily life? Perhaps you can answer that as well. I will answer as well. So for me, it's mainly because of policies, regulations, and campaigns. I wouldn't be so daring to say that I have, evidence in front of my eyes of anything, and because I don't. And third question, to this problem, is the solution to consume in any way, to produce more stress, let's say, on the earth, on the atmosphere? Is the solution to perhaps buy more things? And if so, why would the solution be to this kind of problem be, consuming more things, alternative things, perhaps? And this I ask because me myself, I've always been, this kind of hoarding person. I like to collect things and reuse old stuff, fix stuff. I've never once in my life, bought a new car. I bought a new computer once when I was young. After that, I've always bought used ones. I like to keep my clothes for a long time. I don't like to buy new clothes. And just for an example, without getting too much into detail and information, I still have underwear from 10 years back, and that goes for all my kind of clothes. So if the solution is to consume, then someone is making a profit. And if someone is making a profit, there will be, strong incitements for the movement to keep going. People invest the time and the money into perhaps products to, solve the problem in some way. But, as I've never been, big heavy consumer of anything. My biggest damage to my economy is perhaps, food. So, if you have a car that's perhaps 10 years old, and as of now you see campaigns for new kind of cars with a totally new technology, technology that you don't really know much about. You don't know how it will age. You don't know what it will be in, say, 20 years. Perhaps you will need to buy even newer technology or upgrade the ones that you have bought. You don't know. So that was 3 questions and some addition to it. And let's get back to, the basis on why to criticize, or why to look for, holes in this kind of movement. So this is a famous quote that I've remember since I read it, and that is, it's along the lines of, it's better to be a warrior in the garden than it is to be a gardener in war. So from this quote, I at least derive, there's 2 possibilities for your expectations. And either you are, preparing or expecting the worst, or you're preparing or expecting, the best. So to be a warrior in the garden, I would say you're prepared for the worst kind of scenario, but you are in a peaceful place. If war was coming to a warrior in the garden, the warrior would be at peace, I would say. And instead, if you are a gardener in war, perhaps you were, before the war, expecting the best. You were a gardener in a peaceful place. You were doing peaceful things. But, if shit hits the fan, what do you do as a gardener? And that's once again coming back to, being the devil's advocate and why it's important. at least for me. So I'll ask you a question again. What's the worst kind of event or scenario that you can imagine? Now, what's the worst thing that you can imagine? So hopefully you have imagined something. And then I want you to ask yourself, this event, this scenario, or this thing, whatever it may be, is it in any way, your fault? Is it in any way your obligation to, expect this kind of scenario or event or thing? And if not, why would you think of such a event, scenario, or thing? So I think I want to relate this to, the movement as a phenomenon. So the worst thing you can imagine, that's something that you really want to avoid, right? Going back to and comparing it to, the really kind of old movements, our old religions and everything, they all have a scenario that's the bad kind, and some people call it hell, and it always seems to be, the worst kind of scenario that we can imagine. And depending on what kind of religion and what kind of time the religion is from, or the scripts that make up it, the worst kind of scenario is always kind of different. And a long time ago, the worst thing you could imagine perhaps was famine, disease, some kind of hellfire, bodies with open wounds, perhaps limbs disattached. That's the kind of, really bad things that you would see in those times. So think about that when you compare to what's the worst kind of event scenario that you can imagine. Is it based on what you have seen and you have, thought about, perhaps reasoned to? Or is it based on what you have been told or communicated to? Read about, seen on, made up shows, for example? It's just a good question to ask yourself. And these kind of movements always have also, the best possible scenario. And, religions have heaven, as many people say, paradise perhaps, where everything is just great forever. So I think the climate movement, it has these aspects as well. The bad scenario, well, at least I've heard or read about a lot of things that would happen. The water level would rise to such an extent that people would lose their homes, lose their possibility to live. And everything, insects would die, animals would not be able to survive, and I'm sure you can think of at least some kind of things as well. So my critique of this climate movement is it's so simple, it's can boil down to this simple measurement of CO2. But is it really so important? I would say, wearing this kind of shirt is a good thing for the climate, and that kind of reasoning, because with this shirt I don't have to turn the heat up. This shirt is really old. All the time that went into it is preserved. It's not destructed in any way. Energy is not wasted. Perhaps you like to apply, different kind of cleaning products to yourself, to your home, to your things at home. Perhaps you eat a lot of medicines. Perhaps you dye your hair frequently also. I don't know. All these kind of things add up also. And, medicines and, the chemicals that go into hair dye, nail polish, perfumes, cleaning your car, polishing it. All these kind of things also affect, the climate, because the climate is not only about CO2, it's about the environment that we live in, it's the environment that the rest of the nature live in. So I think it's just stupid to boil it down to this simple measurement, just because this simple measurement is something that people can, take to heart and compare with and relate to. So my critique is, also about the name of the movement. Climate change. What does it mean? Climate is always changing. Seasons come and go. The sun goes up and down every day. Temperature rise and fall over the years. Say 15,000 years ago, people wouldn't be living in this area of the world. As you may have learned sometime, we have something called ice age over time. And the ice ages, they make the temperature rise and go up and down. So, before attaching to any kind of movement, you must also ask yourself, what happens to this movement over time? And what would you do when the next ice age arrives? Would you try to heat up the earth again? Would you dig up all the oil and coal and gas and burn it just to produce more CO2? Well, I don't think so. Perhaps you say, well, let's shovel that problem in front of us and deal with what's important now. And, that's exactly what someone with a lot of time and money invested in a new product that they want to, get onto the market, get people invested into. And once again, being the devil's advocate it's about not being used for something. It's about being able to spend your time and the time you spend to think about stuff on, the stuff that you want to think about in a reasonable manner. So, one more thing about, the climate movement. So you want to attach the movement to something that you do in your daily routine. Sorry, my battery is going out. I'm just going to plug it in. Alright, sorry about that. My phone died. So, where was I? Yeah, connecting the movement to something that we all, do during our daily routines. It's a perfect way to, connect your life with perhaps guilt, and once again, compare it to the old kind of movements, religions. What do they want to produce in someone that does not oblige to the movement? they want to produce guilt in that individual to make them feel like they have to act or think in a certain manner. So something that we all need in our daily routine, in our lives, is, as I just noticed, you need energy. Energy, what can it be? Well, for yourself, you need food. So if you can, attach these kind of CO2 measurements to the food that you consume, you can also attach, guilt and, perhaps a feeling of that you have to do something, perhaps you have to oblige to something, just because of what you consume, eat. And what we need more, we need, energy overall. Perhaps you have a car that needs energy. Perhaps you run a company that needs energy in any kind, electricity. And, if you can attach some kind of sense of obligation to, perhaps adjust or correct or compensate for your consumption, well, that's a perfect way to get you involved in the movement. So, and coming back to the quote, rather be a warrior in the garden than a gardener in war. What if shit hits the fan? If expecting the worst in a scenario. Let's say that all kind of help from government or society at large, disappears for some reason. Would you rather have, cattle to, perhaps gain dairy, perhaps eggs, perhaps, slaughter them for meat? Would you rather have that kind of food supply, or would you prefer to have, more vegetable-based supply? In a dire situation, and it's also the reason why, people like to consume meat and dairy. It's because it's very high in energy, it's high in protein, and it contains a lot of stuff that your body needs. So, at least for me, in a dire situation, perhaps war, I would prefer to have, not only, but I would prefer to have meat and, animal products at my disposal, because it would help me to survive, I think. That's my kind of reasoning anyway. And think also, in a dire situation, if your car is dependent on, be able to charge from electricity, what if the net goes down? What if the supply is not coming in anymore? What do you do about your car? A battery can hold energy, but it's, very affected by weather conditions. It's affected by, time. It won't last forever. Compared to, say, gasoline, you can keep it in a tank and it can stay there. So in a dire situation, I would prefer to have, my old car with gasoline and a supply. That would mean I would have control over the situation if it gets bad, expecting the worst. And let's see, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but is there anything, this kind of climate movement is not criticizing that it perhaps should be criticizing? And if so, why is that? And, my main point of interest in this kind of question is, why are we focusing on, what an individual does? Why are we getting so much information about what, a person should eat, or what kind of traveling options or patterns a person should have, when, well, at least in my country, I see a lot of big companies that consume a lot of energy. It's popping up here and there, and as far as I have seen, not much of the climate movement is pointing out this. Facebook creating their data centers, Amazon, Google, and overall the collection of data of citizens and activities. Why is this so important? And why would we want to spend our natural resources like energy from water, wind and sun on these kind of things? Is it something that seems like something I would come up with myself? No, it's not. But it's a thing that I would come up with if I had, an interest in, well, let's say for collecting data. If I have an interest in getting to know my targets, my market, my consumers, I would like to know what their kind of behavior patterns are. And are we seeing much criticism of this kind of data collection and the energy that it's needed for it? Not that I can notice. Instead, we're getting information on what an individual should eat and what an individual should, buy. So, think about it. If you buy a new car, electric one, when you trash your old car, what do you trash? Well, you trash all the energy that went into the planning of that car, or the construction and development and everything. And me myself, I don't drive my car very often, but I would like to be able to keep doing that without having to pay more for it, because I've always seen myself as quite want to put it as a climate aware, but I've always been aware of what I do, how it affects my surroundings. I don't throw trash around me. Well, as I said, I reuse clothes, I fix things. I don't use any unnecessary products for myself. I don't use anything for my skin. I don't use anything for my hair, other than perhaps some soap and shampooing every now and then. So just want to end with, what can you do for the nature and the climate without having to oblige to, with the movement and the front figures and the political leaders and, all the marketing and all the people that want you to buy their products, not to not oblige to their, opinions and reasonings and regulations and laws. And I think it's a good starting point to just, think about what is this kind of movement, and why is it trying to put, the guilt and shame on you as an individual? Perhaps you're not affected. I wouldn't say that I'm too affected, but I'm affected, over time, because anyway, as I see it, I think they would like to introduce new taxes, and I can't see why, because I don't see myself as part of the problem, and it's not fair. So some may say, why, but don't you want to, help save the planet? Save the world? Humanity, perhaps? And I have no doubt that this planet would survive, without this kind of movement. I have no doubt that humanity will survive without this kind of movement. But the people that put time and money into their companies and marketing, their kind of movement probably will not survive without this kind of green movement. Yeah, that's my opinion on, the climate movement. Thanks for listening. So I just remember a few points that I would like to include. And as the video has already been cut up, I thought it doesn't really matter if I do another small sequence. So with this, movement, I think I see a lot of places and opportunities that companies, would like to sell you a product that's cheaper to produce, and they will market it at something that's good for the climate. So, the latest around here is that you will not be able to get, these plastic straws for your meal at McDonald's, I think. And it doesn't bother me really. I have never used those, because it just seems stupid to get some plastic in a package to be able to drink. But now they forbid you to take them, and of course this kind of product has always been included in their production price or cost. So now they're removing it, and they're making profit off of your goodwill. And I don't think it's a bad thing to remove them. I don't need them, but I think it's good to be noticing when this kind of things happen. And also, if all the people selling you food products, if they could produce those products for a lesser price and sell it to you for the same price, they're making a good profit out of that. And in the end, is it for the better? Well, we don't know. It's for the better for the company, as long as you buy things, keep consuming. And yeah, I think the dream of food companies would be to perhaps sell you packages of grass at the same price as you would pay for any other meal. That's one kind of cynic end goal, at least that I can imagine. Yeah, thanks again for listening.